production, and New Channels has no responsibility for the content or opinions expressed therein. The following program is not a New Channels production, and New Channels has no responsibility for the content or opinions expressed therein.
Town of Volney, monthly board meeting, July 8th, 1993. As a public service to my fellow residents of the town of Volney, I have been volunteering my time to videotape meetings since January of 1992. My only motive is a firm belief that an informed electorate will make an informed decision at election time that will ultimately benefit us all. If you share my belief and would help to donate blank videotapes to help with my expenses, please call me at 598-5120. My name is Terry Reynolds. Videotapes of all Town of Volney monthly board meetings are available to rent free of charge to the public at Video World.
It's 7 o'clock. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Will you all rise while Councilman Boardl leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before I ask the Deputy Town Clerk to call the roll, I'd like to make an announcement that our Town Clerk, Byron Rowley, is still undergoing testing. Other than that, I can't report anything. He has occasional dizzy spells, and we all wish him our best and hope he's back soon. Because of the load of his office, and Pat Kerfing also working as the clerk for the judges, her time, it cannot be spent with as much time as Byron Rowley has been spending. So Byron has appointed Florence McDougall as a deputy town clerk. We can have two deputy clerks, and he has appointed her, and she is taking the minutes of the meetings tonight, and welcome Florence and thank you. Will you call the roll, please?
Councilman Ridgway.
Here.
Councilman Rose.
Here.
Councilwoman Smart.
Here.
Councilman Warner.
Here.
Supervisor McFarland.
Here. The first meeting is a public meeting to address an amendment of our zoning ordinance relative to towers in the town of Volney. And while there are two resolutions which will be considered during the regular board meeting, the ordinance itself, many people have received copies of that. In the past, I have a copy. There are copies here if you don't have them. If you wish, I will read the ordinance itself. It starts off, Section 1, Legislative Intent. Is there any reason for me to read the ordinance itself? Does anybody want it written? Dennis, it's not necessary to read it if everybody has a copy?
No, the copies were made available.
Thank you. Dennis Hawthorne, the town attorney, is with us tonight and will be leaving us following the voting on the resolutions. I would like to remind everybody present that the purpose of this hearing is to hear comments relative to the moratorium itself. And that is basically a delaying action while the town board considers towers as part of their zoning laws process, and it does not allow the construction or further, if it is passed, does not allow the further work or construction of a tower in the town. It is, again, solely to discuss the moratorium. I would like to point out that the pros and cons of a tower itself are not germane to this hearing. That if you wish to talk about the Glen or Cellular One or Pierce Drive and how it affects you, I will rule you out of order, because that is not what this hearing is about. It is about a moratorium to delay any work by anyone on a tower in the town of Volney. With that, I will open the public hearing and hear comments from the public. Yes.
Alex Grimshaw, 31 Cricket Lane. I'd like to speak in support of a moratorium, and what I'd like to do is just start out with some of the questions I think a moratorium and changes in the zoning law could address. Some of the questions that come to mind for residents is long-term exposure to microwave transmissions a concern to public health? How are the aesthetic aspects of the community and natural environment affected by a construction of a series of communication towers? Can residents be assured of privacy and freedom from unsightly and obtrusive nuisances that may be considered harmful to the senses? Do local zoning laws adequately regulate the construction and placement of communication towers themselves? These are just a few of the questions residents have raised regarding the construction and placement of communication towers in the town of Volney, raising concerns over proposed cellular and other communication towers may be new to local residents, but they've simply joined a growing number of communities across the country who have been questioning the use and location of communication towers that make cellular communications possible. Some people may be asking themselves why the big concern over one or two towers I can assure you that it will not stop there. Communities across the country have seen an explosive growth of cellular communication networks since the mid-'80s, and most have not been prepared for such construction. In 1986, there were only 32 cellular communication networks in the country, and by 1981, there was over 600. Subscribers to communication services are being added at a rate of about 6,500 new subscribers a day nationally. And the coverage and competition has been pretty fierce. Once one communication tower is located in an area, you can be assured that the competition is going to follow suit and request that they also construct a communication tower. It's pretty much the same strategy McDonald's has used and other fast food networks in terms of staying competitive with each other. Let me cite just a few more reasons why additional construction of towers, more than one or two, is probably going to follow. The very nature of cellular communication technology will almost guarantee that additional towers in the future will be added. Some of the evidence behind that is that a communication tower has a limited range of anywhere from 10 to 20 miles. This is commonly referred to as a cell site. Hence, that's where the name cellular communication actually comes from. As the number of subscribers in an area increases, which is basically the intent of all the people providing the service, there's an added requirement for additional construction. We probably would not have raised a lot of concern over the construction of towers, and that is many times related to the fact that the efficiency of communications is determined many times by the location and the height of the equipment itself. What that means is that if you can see the communication tower itself, chances are you're going to have better reception or better service. And that's where some of the concern comes up in siting these as well as constructing these. And as a lot of people have been informed, this is not covered in the zoning code as of right now. So this is one of the main reasons why I support the moratorium. Most zoning codes do not address the construction or location of communication facilities. And a lot of areas have been overwhelmed by the request and the demand for such construction. Considering the questions and concerns being raised by communities across the country, from California to Massachusetts, many communities have been revising their zoning laws so that they can prepare themselves for the requests that are going to come up. I think it's false to think that communities can stop completely the construction of these facilities. They will be coming, and they will be put into areas to facilitate the needs of many of the subscribers. The problem that we're faced with is we have no guidelines. And many of the existing guidelines have been stretched and forced to fit uses that they weren't planned for originally 20 years ago when they were actually put into use. Some communities have come up with a variety of criteria to protect residential areas from being overwhelmed and overrun by communication facilities and allow for orderly growth. Some of the neighboring towns, such as Webster and North Syracuse, have been drafting guidelines to regulate communication tower construction and siting, and I think we can learn and we can benefit from their experience. The town of Volney is in a very unique position to take a leadership role in setting some precedents that I believe everyone in the county of Oswego would benefit from. And I think it would be nice for the town of Volney to take a precedent and be first to do something that would probably bring a lot of notice from a lot of neighboring areas. I support and urge the town board to pass a moratorium on the construction and siting of communication towers and their use, and take the time that is provided by the moratorium to draft specific regulations that address their compatibility with existing land use, aesthetics, and related health issues. Thank you for your time.
Anyone else? Yes.
Yes, my name's Kevin Conley. I'm chairman of the planning board, and just want to state that the planning board met this past Tuesday night, July 6th. We held a special meeting. At that meeting, one of the areas we did deal with was the proposal by the town of Volney, the town board, on a temporary moratorium on towers ordinance. As a planning board, we are asked on many occasions which involve changes in zoning laws or adoptions to zoning laws to comment or make recommendations either for or against the proposal. We proposed a resolution unanimously that night, which I believe each board member has a copy of. Briefly, I'll read it real quick. The town of Volney has received copies of the proposed town of Volney temporary moratorium on towers ordinance. Whereas the Volney Planning Board has reviewed the proposed ordinance at its meeting on July 6, 1993 and agrees with its legislative intent, definition, scope and control, and area of application. And whereas the Planning Board recognizes the town board's lead position as a legislative body within town government, and that through passage of this ordinance, the Planning Board will be compelled to halt review of any applications by developers interested in developing or locating commercial towers in the township. And whereas the Planning Board intends to comply with this ordinance if passed, therefore be it resolved that the Planning Board, after careful review, recommends to the town board to proceed with adoption of the temporary moratorium on towers ordinance. We basically recommended in favor of this moratorium, and it was approved unanimously. I'd just like to state quickly, I travel around a lot on work, and what Mr. Grimshaw said is true. In the last few years, a tower just went up right in the middle of town in the town of Cato. If you go into the village of Cato, right on the center of town, there's a big communications tower. Granby has a tower. As you're going down the thruway, you can see them periodically throughout the length of the thruway. It is something that's growing in the area, and as a planning board chairman, speaking for the other members, we want to do what we're asked to do in our general plan that was presented to the town and act in the public interest. And sometimes we're constrained by the very vagueness of the laws under which we operate. If there are no setback requirements relating to a specific proposal, we can't just put some in place for this specific project. So it makes it difficult for us sometimes to both act in the interest of the zoning laws and at the same time act in the public interest when the laws are as vague as they are in this area. So the time taken to improve the laws and tighten the restrictions up, or basically set up reasonable restrictions, would help us in the future in taking action, because I think also, as Mr. Grimshaw said, we can expect applications in the future. I don't think something like this will stop communication towers from ever locating in Volney. We can't do that. But at least we can set up a reasonable set of guidelines and principles and setbacks that can help us as a planning board act better in the public interest when working with these companies and reviewing these site plans. So I encourage the town board, I applaud the town board for the resolution. I think it's very clear and precise. I think it was very well put together, and I think I'm speaking for the entire planning board in recommending that the town board go forward with the moratorium and approve it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kevin. Along that same line, the Oswego County Department of Planning and Community Development has sent us a letter. The above reference matter, which is the temporary moratorium on towers, the above reference matter was submitted to the Oswego County Planning Board for review pursuant to Article 12-B, Section 239 of the New York State General Municipal Law. The town of Volney is proposing a temporary moratorium on towers. The Oswego County Planning Board considered this matter at its meeting on July 6, 1993, and recommends approval subject to legal advice of the town attorney. Sincerely, Karen B. Noyes. Is there any other public comment? Yes.
I have a statement that I wanted to read. Jean Conway. I wholeheartedly support a moratorium on towers and praise your recent efforts to see that one is put into effect so that you may have the opportunity to write the zoning as it pertains to this important issue. I am unclear about the section regarding variances in the proposed moratorium. The town board certainly has the right to issue both use and area variances as they pertain to this moratorium. However, I would question your objectivity in this matter, as you are the board who has initiated and written this legislation. You have a very capable zoning board of appeals who deals with the issuance of variances on a monthly basis and are an unbiased third party. Secondly, I am unclear as to what undue hardship means. I believe that this needs to be spelled out so that there are no questions as to what tests or criteria an applicant must meet in order to obtain a variance. As it stands now, Section 267B of the town law clearly states the tests an applicant must meet in order to be granted a use variance. There are 4 of them, including, under applicable zoning regulations, the applicant is deprived of all economic use or benefit from the property in question, and this must be established by competent financial evidence. This is a very difficult test to meet. There are also 3 additional tests, as well as 5 criteria for area variances. The state laws are very clear, and I urge you to recognize them. Thank you.
Gene, are you saying that the variance should be granted by the zoning board of appeal?
I guess my feeling is that you do have a pretty capable zoning board who deals with this on a monthly basis and are trained in this area. So I guess that would be my advice. Certainly it's your right to issue those variances, but I think you need to be well aware of the tests and the law that pertains to them. It supersedes our zoning ordinance, which is outdated. Our zoning ordinance talks about unnecessary hardship and those kinds of things, and it's very unclear, but the tests under Town Law 267B are very clear, and in the 3 years that I was on the Zoning Board of Appeals, we basically granted 1 use variance, and we had other people appeal for them. It's just that coming up with the competent financial evidence is very, very difficult. We had people bringing in their tax returns and everything else to show us that they would be losing. So I guess my advice would be to put it in the hands of your zoning board.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'd just like to comment. I thought the way the variance was phrased here, and correct me, Gene, I thought the variance was a variance that was applicable to a landowner, that if a resident of the town of Volney who owns land and feels that this proposal would propose an undue hardship on them as a landowner, that they're the ones who can go to the town board and ask, you know, for a...
For use or area variance.
Right, but not a developer, not an outside, like Cellular One would not have the opportunity, or
Well,
some other
regardless
company.
of whether it's Cellular One or the landowner or whatever, I think that it needs to be very clearly stated in this section. Oh, this says that when imposed upon a landowner, okay, it does say that. It does say that.
Sure.
Or developer, it says or developer in the section.
I saw that. My comments on that would be as follows, and that certainly the town board could refer to the issuance and consideration of variances to the ZBA. It's a capable board. Certainly that could be done. There's no reason not to. As drafted, it puts that power in the town board. The town board could keep the power to itself or grant that power to the ZBA. As to the test for determination, certainly, again, it could have been, and could be written with more specificity, paralleling 267A. It isn't. It could be redrafted and reconsidered upon redrafting. What I would suggest, or my reading of this would be, is that assuming the town board kept control of the issuance of variances, then you're right, on an application-by-application basis, the town board would have to determine, well, what is undue hardship. I would submit that the town board at that point would be looking for some kind of statutory or historical guidance, and I would expect the town board may well open 267B and say, well, this seems to be the New York State legislature saying should be considered on such things when we're considering things, even if this town law doesn't call it undue hardship, when we're coming to that conclusion. So, although it doesn't say it, my expectation, or I guess hope, would be that if this issue came before the town board, they'd essentially apply 267B by reference. Again, it could be written to say, apply it by reference. It could state it. It doesn't. The board could decide to have it redrafted.
No, so at the same time, if somebody comes in wanting a variance on towers and turns it into the town board, Can the town board then turn it over to the zoning board? For a decision? Or should it be redrafted now?
As drafted, the town board is specifically reserving that right and power to itself. If you want a referral mechanism, then I would suggest to be drafted in that.
Drafted
In Dennis, would then it be possible for us simply to, upon adoption, simply modify this ordinance itself and simply do that, or does this then have to go up? See where I want to go, or do we have to redraft the ordinance, or can we do it just through an editorial change type of thing?
Can't do it through an, should I say, editorial change type of thing. Certainly, this could be adopted tonight if the town board, after public hearing, feels that adoption of this document is in the best interest of the town, that the legislative intent of the town would be furthered by adopting it tonight. That could be done. Then certainly the town could consider amending this provision of the town of zoning ordinance as adopted, recognizing that there would be the same procedure for amending this as there was for creating this. That is resolution, public hearing, and publication after adoption. So you can't just do it by a resolution, striking a pen through and adding more language. It could be done essentially in a two-step process to get to where Ms. Conley was.
Then, do I understand you to say that it is this document in total that we will be actually voting on, and we are not really able to modify this in any way tonight?
If you vote to pass this tonight,
Yeah.
as it is, you can't turn around tomorrow or the next
No,
meeting
but
and
can
change
we
it
do it tonight?
before adopting it.
Before adopting it?
Yes, that's certainly the purpose of a public hearing, is to gain input from the public and determine if there should be changes made of a technical nature, or of any nature to it, and whether or not at all it should be adopted. However, that being said, I give this caveat, and that being the referrals under the town of Volney zoning ordinance to the town of Volney Planning Board, and the referrals under the general municipal law to the county planners are required to get their input before adoption. If there are changes to what those two agencies have already seen, the town board may want to consider resubmitting it for reconsideration by both of those two planning agencies before passing it. Obviously, that adds a time factor to what we're talking about tonight. You run the risk that if down the road it says it's been changed in a substantive manner, that the planners should have seen it again and made perhaps differing recommendations to the town.
I would like to think that we should be doing this not at the public hearing, but at the time of voting on the resolutions. I think the concern is a valid one. I would rather not start revising it because we are here to hear you. And we can make any revisions if those revisions we feel are appropriate at the time of voting upon these resolutions. And they are going to be the first two this evening. But I think it's a valid point. Dennis, if you would want to think about that in the contents of what would be involved in making the change, I would assume, from the town board to the zoning board of appeals. Is that what you were suggesting, Jean?
That was my suggestion.
No.
You know, certainly you can retain that right. I think the bottom point or the end point is that you need to be aware of, you know, this whole issue of undue hardship and really what that is referenced to. So you can take the right to do it. I guess my point is that I want to make sure that you're aware of Town Law 267B and what goes along with it. So.
Thank you. Well, Dennis, if you would think about this, and then when it comes up for discussion, see what recommendations you might make. Any other public comment? Yes.
Yes, my name is Cynthia Colbert. I live at 16 Old Maple Avenue, and I would like to say that I support the moratorium. Although we don't have everyone here, 2 months ago we did give you a petition for a moratorium asking you to look at one, and we had 86 signatures in favor of the moratorium at that time. And I hope you'll consider that in your vote. Obviously, there are a lot of people concerned concerned. I think Mr. Grimshaw's points were very well taken, and I believe Mrs. Conway's are too. I might ask Mr. Hawthorne why a variance section is necessary at all in a moratorium. I'm really not clear as to why you would include a variance section, since a moratorium is really a stopgap measure on something, and it's only temporary. Why is there a variance section at all?
The intention of that, when drafted into the proposal, I guess follows this thinking, and maybe it's too conservative of a way of thinking, that is, for every rule, there's an exception. Any law that says something is absolutely prohibited, can't be done, ever under any circumstances, is subject to challenge. Not saying that the challenge is going to win, but it might be subject to challenge on that basis alone. You haven't allowed an exception. Well, if you put in essentially a pressure relief valve, that's what that is. To say if there's somebody who thinks they're so egregiously hurt by it, they can come forward and try to satisfy the test, hardship or 267D or whatever test is identified in there. That was the thinking of having it there. Again, the board could take it out. In drafting, and I did do the drafting on this. In drafting this, as I do most legislation, when I draft it, I try to draft it from, shall we say, conservative point, something that hopefully will hold up. One, not be subject to challenge, and two, if it is subject to challenge, certainly survive that challenge. And that was my intention in drafting.
Thank you. That's what I believed it was put in for, and I just wanted to clarify that in my own mind, that basically it's there to protect the town and make sure the law can be upheld. As long as the town board and everyone using the law recognizes why it's there, then I support it as it's written, really. I don't think it's a problem.
Dennis, you had another one?
Well, I just mentioned it to Dennis Hawthorne. Maybe it would satisfy the concerns of some of the people if he struck that word. I didn't think it was in there, and I apologize. Developer, because why would a developer, in my opinion, who doesn't own property in the town and is actually someone from outside of the community, how could they be suffering an undue hardship by erecting something that in a town, if you know what I mean? So I could see that. I think it's necessary, as Mr. Hawthorne said, to have that pressure valve for a landowner in the town. People in the town who own property in the town have to have the ability to appeal or to question something. But why would a developer, in essence, somebody who would, for a commercial reason, want to put something in the town, how would they suffer? How could they suffer an undue hardship, I guess, is the question I have. And maybe some of the concerns that were requested could be solved by simply striking that word and just leave it to the point of upon a landowner, you know, someone who owns property in the town.
Valid point. I will let Dennis answer that. Probably, Dennis, for answering it now or during discussion.
I can answer that right now, because I was thinking about it. Kevin addressed me a moment ago on that. I guess I'm thinking from a logic point of view, if, and you may well be right, it would seem to me that it would be very difficult for a developer to show undue hardship. Very difficult, if not impossible. They don't own the land. You know, they're here for that, usually for one project. That being the case, if we leave it in, they're never going to be able to satisfy the test anyhow, so we might as well leave it in. But you, as you suggested, could strike it in the same result, except that striking is an amendment to or a change to this with the caveats I guess I gave earlier.
Thanks, Dennis.
Charles Smart. My question is that if we are, my understanding of what Dennis said earlier, perhaps, is that we may have problems with this document altogether if we start making amendments, if we strike something from it. You seem to be suggesting to me that we have to resubmit it to the Oswego County Planning Board and other agencies that have seen it. And as Dennis has said, the developer really doesn't have an interest. I think perhaps we'd be in a worse position by striking it and not being able to enact the ordinance and have it hold up if we make that change. Maybe Dennis could clarify that.
Well, I guess I don't have more to add than what I mentioned earlier on that. Certainly I would submit that the prudent course of action would not be to make changes to this document prior to adoption of this document tonight, unless the board intended to make changes to it tonight and refer it back to the agencies, and then reconsider it after they've issued their approvals, if they approve it. Certainly the board could make changes after adoption of this document tonight in the nature of an amendment for any of the several reasons that have come up. If the board is interested in changing this, is satisfied with this document, that it serves the purpose the board wants to serve in general, and that the board is satisfied that tonight, now's the time to do it, I'd say go forward with adopting it tonight. And if there are these quote-unquote technical changes, make them by way of an amendment to this amendment to the Town of Volney zoning ordinance next month. You know, or
Would
not in
require a
CSO.
public hearing.
Yes, it would. I mean, any amendment to this, which is it becomes part of the zoning, would require the whole public hearing process.
Any other comments? Yes, sir.
John Conway, my only comment is on the same issue. Regarding the variance, it's clearly the intent of the regulation to have an appellate type possibility in the regulation and a variance to strictly change where it says in the first sentence, town board to the zoning board of appeals, at least in my mind, would seem not to be a real change in intent of the regulation, close to an editorial change. Certainly not something that I would think the county planning board would have any concern with. I think that would probably be a good change just because it makes it clear, consistent with our current regulations on how to get a variance, and that there's better definition of what would constitute undue hardship.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes. Marie? Your name, please, for the record.
Marie Austin. According to this, the moratorium is for 6 months, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, if, in the variance, in order to clear it up from my understanding, if someone comes to the town board within that 6 months and presents a hardship, then you would have to make a decision on that as a town board? It wouldn't go to the zoning board, is that correct?
That's the way it appears to me, yes.
Okay, now, what happens if there's a hardship regarding any other town type of zoning right now? Do they come to you, or do they go directly to the zoning board? Who makes that decision right now?
On what issue?
If there's any type of hardship regarding the zoning issue, do they come to the town board, or do they come to the zoning board?
Zoning board.
They go to the zoning board. Well, my concern is, as it was before, and I agree with Jeannie, in order to keep the politics out of this, I think it would behoove you as a town board to direct this to the zoning board. I don't even know why you'd want to even take this responsibility. Because let's say someone who may be proposing a cellular tower and then come into you and say, geez, you know, we've got some money invested, it could be a hardship, would you consider it? Then it would put you on the spot, and you'd have to be voting. You'd have to vote on this. And I think that puts you in a very awkward position. And the whole purpose of zoning and planning, as you know, is to keep the politics out of it. And whether it means amending this or rewriting it, I really think that that's something that should be seriously considered, is taking it back over to the zoning, because everything else is to the zoning board, and I'd hate to see you put back in that position again.
Anybody else? Yes.
Jim Schreck, live on Cricket Lane in the Glen. I also speak out in favor of the moratorium. Obviously, we're concerned about, in this particular instance, the tower as it is proposed, but also for any future projects that the town might have where it isn't spelled out specifically in the zoning laws exactly what is and what is not allowed. I really think we need to get all of our zoning laws updated. I understand we're working on it, but I think we really need to push it through. I hope the board will really work hard in keeping the zoning committee moving in that direction so that any future projects will have clarified within the zoning laws so we won't have this type of a problem in the future. Thank you.
I do have a communication from the legal firm of Barney, Grossman, Roth, and Dubow, attorneys for the Syracuse Telephone Company. They've asked that this be placed in the record. And it was written to Dennis Hawthorne. As you know, our firm represents Syracuse Telephone Company, which has submitted an application to the town of Volney for a site plan approval for construction of a cellular transmitter at a site in the town of Volney in order that cellular telephone service become available to the town of Volney, the city of Fulton, and surrounding areas. Please refer the package of application materials submitted to Town of Volney Planning Board Chairman Kevin Connolly under cover of letter from James A. Walls, project manager for Syracuse Telephone Company, dated June 15, 1993. This renewed application for site plan approval was reviewed by the Town of Volney Planning Board at their meeting on June 15, 1993, during which meeting the Planning Board determined that this renewed application would be deemed complete 5 days after the town's receipt of a letter from the property owner confirming, in accordance with the town's zoning ordinance, Section 7, subsection B, paragraph 2, that the plot plan submitted for site plan approval is accurately dimensioned, showing the location of all existing and proposed buildings and structures on the lot. This letter was delivered by the property owner to the Planning Board on June 16, 1993. Therefore, this renewed application for site plan approval was complete no later than June 21, 1993. On June 23, 1993, the Town Board of the Town of Volney conducted a special Town Board meeting at which the Town Board passed Resolution 93-103, setting the date of July 8, 1993 for a public hearing on proposed legislation entitled Temporary Memorandum on Towers Ordinance. The preamble to this proposed legislation notes, among other things, that the Town Board has taken steps to study and analyze, and I'm quoting, has taken steps to study and analyze existing land uses, roads, population trends, and fiscal, institutional, human, and environmental resources of the town in an effort to propose a comprehensive revision of the existing zoning ordinance, end of quote. Please provide at your earliest convenience all documentary evidence of the steps that the Town Board has taken to date in this effort, including copies of all Town Board meeting minutes during which such study and analysis were conducted. Further, this preamble indicates that the volume of applications to the Town of Volney Planning Board for site plan approval of commercial tower installations in recent years has increased substantially. Within the past 2 years, no less than 3 applications for site plan approval of the installation of commercial communication towers have been filed with the Planning Board, end of quote. Based upon our client's knowledge of communication services provided to the area, our experience with the Town of Volney Planning Board during the past year, and reference to the Town Planning Board's minutes of meetings at which the NYNEX mobile cellular communications tower site was discussed, it is our understanding that this reference to 3 applications for site plan approval consists of the NYNEX mobile site plan approval that was granted in 1992, the site plan application submitted by Syracuse Telephone Company that was granted earlier this year and then challenged by a group of residents in a suit in response to which the town did not appear, and the renewal of the same application by Syracuse Telephone Company referred to above. Please advise if this understanding is in any way inaccurate. It is manifestly obvious that the town's proposed temporary moratorium on towers ordinance has evolved wholly and directly as a response to Syracuse Telephone Company's application for site plan approval. In the event this proposed legislation is enacted, and in the event that such enactment prevents the town's planning board from completing the currently pending review of Syracuse Telephone Company's renewed application for site plan approval, Syracuse Telephone Company shall promptly avail itself of all the several remedies provided by applicable law in such circumstances. As I am sure you are aware, a wide array of legal principles provide support to the position that Syracuse Telephone Company would take in the litigation that would necessarily be commenced. In advising the town in connection with the town's pursuit of this imprudent course of action, you may wish to make reference, among other things, to Anderson on zoning, in which Mr. Anderson points out that, quote, administrative procrastination calculated to deny a property owner his right to use his land in a currently lawful manner is supportable neither by law nor by sound ethical practice. But its use is common enough to have provided the materials for a large number of judicial opinions which evenly disapprove of the practice, end of quote, and he quotes the section of law quoted. Among the large number of opinions, please refer to In Re Faymore Development Company Incorporated versus Board of Standards and Appeals, in which the New York Court of Appeals plainly states that quote, "A court may deny an agency the benefit of a change in the law when it has intentionally or even negligently delayed action on an application for a permit or license until after the law had been amended to authorize denial of the application," end of quote. Specifically in regard to the use of moratoria as the basis for a municipality's delay in taking action in an application, please refer to In re Bell Harbor Realty Corporation versus Andrew P. Kerr, in which the Court of Appeals concludes that, quote, "A municipality may not invoke its police powers solely as a pretext to assuage strident community opposition. The municipality must establish that it has acted in response to a dire necessity, that its action is reasonably calculated to alleviate or prevent the crisis situation, and that it is presently taking steps to rectify the problem." As you are undoubtedly aware, that's the end of the quote. As you are undoubtedly aware, and as the courts of New York have ruled in a number of recent cases, Syracuse Telephone Company, as a licensed cellular telephone service provider, is considered a public utility under New York law. Such status and the accompanying regulatory authority, including that of the Federal Communications Commission, impose upon Syracuse Telephone Company the obligation to provide cellular telephone service within the geographical territory for which its authority applies. Also, as a product of its public utility status and the accompanying obligations, Syracuse Telephone Company is entitled to a less stringent standard applicable to zoning decisions, a standard which a municipality cannot eliminate by local zoning or a moratorium. It is undisputed that the town has recently approved the construction and operation of a cellular tower by Syracuse Telephone Company's sole competitor, 9X Mobile, without any apparent effort of the town, on the town's part, to study the issue of towers within the town. Despite the efforts of Syracuse Telephone Company to locate its proposed facilities within an industrial zone under the town's zoning regulations and to comply with all applicable zoning requirements, it now appears that the proposed moratorium is being considered solely, and we believe improperly, on the basis of unfounded, as fully pointed out in the Planning Board's original approval of our initial application for site plan approval, unfounded concerns of a small group of neighbors. Such action, particularly in light of the recent approval of the 9X Tower, appears to be completely inconsistent with the intended duopoly structure of cellular operations and unlawful under New York law. Needless to say, the town's notation of 3 applications for tower site plan approval, one of which resulted in approval, and the second 2 of which actually constitute the single pending Syracuse Telephone Company application, in no way amount to the substantially increased number of applications for commercial tower installations referred to in this proposed legislation. Much less do these applications constitute the dire necessity or crisis condition that the Court of Appeals has developed as a standard for review of such actions as that proposed by the town. In summary, please be advised that Syracuse Telephone Company shall swiftly act to exercise its legal rights in response to the town's enactment of the proposed moratorium on towers ordinance in the event that such enactment prevents the processing of Syracuse Telephone Company's pending application for site plan approval. Should you wish to discuss any of the foregoing further, please do not hesitate to contact the undersigned at your convenience. So that there is no confusion as to the position of Syracuse Telephone Company concerning this matter, I would request that this letter be read and be included in the record of the Town Board public hearing scheduled for July 8th. We are most hopeful that the town will recognize the liabilities associated with proceeding with the adoption of the proposed moratorium and will exercise proper judgment and avoid an unlawful process of prohibiting the public utility operations within its boundaries. We are also hopeful that Syracuse Telephone Company's pending site plan application, which is being prosecuted on a good faith basis, will be reviewed and acted upon by the Town Planning Board without interruption or prejudice. Very truly yours, Randall B. Marcus. Is there any further public comment?
John Halder, 16 Old Maple Avenue. I don't think this moratorium is restricting Cellular One from putting a tower in the town of Volney. This town should have the right to develop siting criteria for towers. Who does this town belong to? The citizens or an outside developer? We don't have any siting criteria for towers in the town of Volney. This wasn't an issue with the 9X tower because of where it went. In this particular situation, we have a residential area immediately adjacent to an industrial area. We have no ordinances for siting towers in this community. We're not restricting Cellular One from building towers in our community. But we need to develop what the criteria are to site a tower. Are we going to put one in a schoolyard? We don't have any criteria. And the fact they're a public utility doesn't mean they can cram a tower down anybody's throat. We should have a right to develop the proper siting criteria in an ordinance for siting these towers in our community. We're not saying we can't have them, we shouldn't have them, and we're not preventing Cellular One from putting one in the town of Volney. But I think we need to consider special cases where a residential community butts right up against an industrial zone. There's lots of things we wouldn't want to allow in an industrial zone that's immediately adjacent to a residential area. And our zoning ordinances ought to cover all those instances. That's what I have to say.
What I would urge the town board to consider both sides of the pro-moratorium, anti-moratorium. As elected officials, I know that that's one of the challenges that you have to handle. And at the same time, I urge you not to be strong-armed by legal threats. I know you have to weigh those legal threats and the liabilities to the residents, and I appreciate that. And at the same time, I think in the communication that Syracuse Telephone, through their law firm, has said, clearly demonstrates the only concern they have is for their own financial and corporate strategies. And if they had conscience or consideration for the residents, I think they'd be a little more understanding. But what I pick up from that letter is they're yielding to the competitive and the financial pressures that 9X is putting on them. And I would expect them to take that kind of stand. But I ask that you put it in perspective with long-term planning that would go on in the community as well.
Any other public statements? Yes?
My name is Bill Pierce. I don't think Mr. Lane's here. I'm surprised you're not here tonight, but this issue was brought up with them people at our public hearings and discussions with them that we're not against towers in our town. 9X wasn't an issue in that the present planning board that was in setting at that time realized that they were coming into town, and a comprehensive plan is continuing changing with technology and everything, and they bought 7 acres of land in an old gravel bed area away from residential development and everything, and it was near a major highway. And this was why they didn't have such thorough, what were they saying, thorough investigating of it. Because for a planning board, you're supposed to be able to use discretion on your decisions. And not only is it, people keep going at these cellular towers, not only cellular towers, 9X, if you want to review 9X towers, they got 7 acres of land. They are a landowner. They might, I don't know if they might call them a developer, but they own 7 acres of land with a 100 by 100 area for just a third tower, but they have room to put up 4 or 5 radio towers if they want it, 2 or 3, 300 feet high if they want it, to get the FAA approval. So the moratorium we need to address these issues, not just this one. we had to look at the other towers that can be developed in our neighborhoods. The residential property, most of Volney is agriculture, so people got a lot of land. And you take home towers that they put up for regular TV antennas, the super high ones. You see them up on 6 in Phoenix there, where they got cables stranding right to the neighbor's line. If the tower falls over, it'll hit the neighbor's house. We don't have regulations against that. You have a perfect example of them people being from Syracuse. All they gotta do is read a paper and they see where 2 gentlemen were putting up a 30-foot tower in their yard. And the yard wasn't big enough, the tower tipped and they hit the home wire line. Just a household parent killed them people, you know? And I imagine they'd probably like to have a moratorium now too if they could speak. But the whole issue is we have been planning in the records show that we planned on this. They were offered to put the tower on NYNEX tower, but they don't even want to work with nobody, with them people on there. And NYNEX, they own the land. They get 6 acres of land right now. The town got used for recreational purposes that they want. They offered that to us. And it's away from everything. If you want to drive up 481, it's less than 500 feet from 481, and you can't even see it from 481. So I think there's more to this issue than just the cellular tower that they want to say in their letter. You know, it's not, we're not picking on them, they're picking on us. And we as the taxpayers, we own our community, or we're supposed to own our community, and you people are supposed to be taking care of us, you know? That's all I got to say.
I just wanted to make a comment on the letter from the attorney as well. Somewhere in there they referenced that it has to be a crisis in order for a moratorium to be implemented. And that kind of strikes me a little bit funny or peculiar. I mean, what is a crisis? Does a tower have to fall on somebody in order for it to be a crisis, and then you can implement a moratorium? So I guess I'm very unclear on what they're talking about as far as a crisis goes.
Yes, I'd like to limit the number of times people speak. It isn't good. I don't want an interchange here. It's a public hearing and give everybody a chance. Yes, sir.
Jack Nicholson, resident of Volney. I'm in favor of the moratorium for most of the reasons that already been expressed. So you got a letter from lawyers that work for a Southern one. I mean, it didn't say anything we wouldn't expect. I mean, they want their application processed. There wasn't anything in there that was very surprising. If they want to compare themselves to NYNEX, I think that could easily be done. You could take a walk up to the location of the NYNEX tower, as Bill was pointed out, and look at the surrounding area and how close it is to residential, or if it's close to, or how close it might be to residents, as opposed to what the cellular one was. If they were trying to represent it as though they would like to be compared to NYNEX, I would think that it'd be a situation that would be happy to accommodate.
Yes. Anybody else? Then I will entertain a motion to adjourn the public hearing.
Second.
Florence, will you poll the council?
Councilman Ridgway.
Aye.
Councilman Rose.
Aye.
Councilwoman Smart.
Aye.
Councilman Warner.
Aye.
Councilman Supervisor McFarland.
Aye. Just take a couple of minute break here. We will start the regular meeting. Take their seat, please. It's 8:04. I'd like to call the meeting of the regular town board to order. Florence, let the minutes show that the same council persons are present. The first resolution involves the minutes of the June 10 regular board meeting. And that is resolution number 93-104. And I will move that the minutes of the June 10, 1993 regular meeting, having been distributed, be approved without reading. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Florence, will you poll the council?
Councilman Ridgway,
Aye.
Councilman Rose,
No, and I'd just like to state, a lot of people have been asking me why I haven't approved the minutes the last 2 years, and the reason being is, first of all, they're not very comprehensive. They don't include a lot of information that I think is pertinent to these meetings, and the other thing is, a lot of public comment is in here, but not all of it. And I think if you're going to include one person's comments, you ought to include all people's comments. You shouldn't discriminate on who gets heard and whose comments are put in the minutes. The other thing is, this is a record, the history of this town board and its conduct. And if we ever do go to court and there's information missing, well, we all know where that could take us. So that's the reason I've been voting against these minutes the last year and a half.
Councilwoman Smart,
Aye.
Councilman Warner,
No.
Supervisor McFarland.
Aye. For your information, Howard, the minutes no longer have to be voted upon. We are doing it because of custom. The second thing, all that has to appear in minutes are basically actions taken by this board. Public comment, anything said other than the resolutions themselves, and actions taken by this board involving voting, that is all that is necessary that appears in the minutes of any meeting.
I'm well aware of that, but I don't have to agree with it.
The next resolution is the approving of the minutes of the special board meeting of June 23. That's resolution number 93-105. And I will move that the minutes of the June 23, 1993 special board meeting, having been distributed, be approved without reading. I've moved it.
Second.
Any discussion? Florence, will you poll the council?
Councilman Ridgway,
Aye.
Councilman Rose,
No.
Councilwoman Smart,
Aye.
Councilman Warner,
No.
Supervisor McFarland.
Aye. The next, resolution number 93-106. I will have somebody else read that since it involves me.
I would move that vouchers number 205 through 213 and 215 through 229 in the amount of $43,149.66 general fund, and vouchers number 161 through 183 in the amount of $11,957.32 highway fund, having been audited, be approved and the supervisor authorized to pay same from funds available.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Florence, will you poll the council?
Councilman Ridgway,
Aye.
Councilman Rose,
Aye to those that I signed.
Councilwoman Smart,
Aye.
Councilman Warner,
Aye to the ones that I signed.
Supervisor McFarland.
Aye. I'm going to ask a question of Councilman Rose and Councilman Warner. I know Councilman Rose hasn't for 2 years signed the travel expenses of Ed Kuhn. Now these are, and others, these are perfectly legitimate travel expenses. He itemizes them. It is part of his job to travel. To not approve a man's expenses, there has to be a reason. And I would appreciate hearing that reason.
I'm very glad you asked that question. Is Mr. Kuhn here? He's left. Good evening. Yes, I will. Well, first of all, I'm sure you remember that I didn't approve of his appointment to begin with. But second of all, I've been following Mr. Kuhn's travels, and if you were here, I would like to ask him the question, why do you travel 5 miles one way and 5 miles back 9 times to inspect an above-ground swimming pool. This $181.72 is travel expense that he has incurred this past month traveling around. Now, if you look at what he's inspected in the last month, that's an awful lot of travel time to do that. Now, an above-ground pool, I don't believe should take more than 1, 2, maybe 3 trips at the most to complete. He's made 9 trips to a particular neighbor of mine and 4 trips to another neighbor of mine for that purpose. Now, I question that. Yes, I do. Maybe you can tell me why he needs to travel 9 times in one location to do that type of thing.
Howard, that's your statement that that man has done that without his being able to reply. I cannot do it for him.
He was here a moment ago. He must have stepped out. Maybe he'll come
Well,
back.
they are legitimate. This is 1 month that you might be talking about, but you have done this consistently, and I can't believe that every month he has visited a pool 9 times.
Just consider it my objection to him being appointed there.
That isn't very responsible, Howard.
I think it was irresponsible to appoint him.
Okay. Communications. Yeah, okay. We're going to go out of order here. Our attorney, Dennis Hawthorne, has other commitments this evening, so we'll move into the 2 resolutions involving the moratorium. And the first one is resolution number 93-107. That basically involves the requirements of seeker relative to moratoriums, and the second one is the moratorium, passing the moratorium and referencing the ordinance that we have been discussing previously. The first resolution, number 93-107, whereas the Town Board of the Town of Volney has caused to be drafted and has reviewed a proposed temporary moratorium on Towers ordinance, and whereas the proposed temporary moratorium ordinance would prohibit the acceptance, processing, review, or granting approval of any building permit or site plan application by the Town of Volney concerning the siting or construction of a tower or towers for a period of 6 months, and whereas the Town Board of the Town of Volney has reviewed the proposed temporary moratorium on Towers ordinance to make a determination as to the potential effect on the environment by the proposed ordinance pursuant to the New York State Environment Quality Review Act, or SEQR. Now therefore be it resolved that the Town Board of the Town of Volney hereby declares itself to be the lead agency under SEQR for the purposes of consideration and adoption of the proposed temporary moratorium on Towers ordinance. And be it further resolved that the Town Board of the Town of Volney hereby determines that the adoption of the proposed temporary moratorium on Towers ordinance is a type 2 action pursuant to sections 617.13, 19, and 167.13, 21 of SEQR, and as such, the action of adopting a temporary moratorium on Towers ordinance is determined not to have a significant effect on the environment, and therefore the requirements of SEQR are satisfied. While this is not addressing the moratorium issue directly, the 2 resolutions are directly related, and I think the discussion on the first one will satisfy continuing discussion on the next one, which is number 108.
Did you move it, Dave?
I will move it.
Second.
Okay, we're open for discussion. After hearing some of the comments by others relative to that singular change, and that it is the singular change being the town board having the ability to make variances. And after hearing what you have said and other discussion, I'll shut my mouth and I'll let Dennis take over here.
I take your asking me to comment on the proposed changes to the moratorium itself.
Strictly has to do with that phrase town board versus zoning board of appeals. I think it's so.
Right.
That would be the next one, wouldn't it?
Right. First, just a sort of point of order, I guess. I would save my comments and board suggest you say board discussion on that issue until the next resolution, which is the resolution to adopt the moratorium itself. This one here is simply recognizing that a proposed moratorium ordinance has been submitted to the town. The town's thinking about it. As such, under seeker, the town has to, or someone has to be lead agency. The town has, it takes that role, has to determine whether it's unlisted type 1 or type 2 action. This merely is a statement the town adopts saying that we've looked at the moratorium. We're not necessarily saying we're adopting it or not adopting it now, but we've recognized that the moratorium itself would be a type 2 action, not have a significant effect on the environment, and as such is a type 2 action. This kind of resolution should be adopted, must be adopted with any land use proposal. So I would suggest perhaps discussion and vote on whether or not you agree it's a type 2 action, no significant effect, and then move on to the next resolution. We'll carry on the discussion.
Thank you for that clarification. There is a discussion necessary.
I think this is boilerplate. I think that we need this prior to going into the moratorium, so.
Thank you. Florence, will you poll the council?
Councilman Ridgway.
Aye.
Councilman Rose.
Aye.
Councilwoman Smart. Aye. Councilman Warner.
Aye.
Supervisor McFarland.
Aye. The next resolution, 93-108. Whereas the town board has caused to be drafted a proposed temporary moratorium on towers ordinance for the town of Volney, and whereas the proposed temporary moratorium ordinance would prohibit the acceptance, processing, review, or granting approval of any building permit or site plan application by the town of Volney concerning the siting or construction of a tower or towers for a period of 6 months, and whereas the town board has made a determination pursuant to the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act, or SEEKR, that adoption of the proposed ordinance is a type 2 action under SEEKR, and thus has no significant effect on the environment, and whereas the proposed moratorium on tower ordinance was referred to the Town of Volney Planning Board for its report and recommendations pursuant to Section 9B of the Town of Volney zoning ordinance, and whereas the Town of Volney Planning Board has recommended that the proposed temporary moratorium on towers ordinance be adopted, and whereas the town board has referred the proposed temporary moratorium on towers ordinance to the County of Oswego Planning Agency pursuant to Section 239-M of the New York State General Municipal Law for its report and recommendations, and whereas the County of Oswego Planning Agency has recommended adoption of the proposed temporary moratorium on towers ordinance, and whereas a public hearing for the purpose of considering the proposed temporary moratorium on towers ordinance was duly noticed and held on July 8, 1993 at the Town of Volney Municipal Building, County Route 6, Fulton, New York, at which time all persons interested both for and against the adoption of the proposed temporary moratorium on towers ordinance were given an opportunity to be heard. Now therefore be it resolved that the Town Board of the Town of Volney, pursuant to New York Town Law and the Town of Volney zoning ordinance, does hereby amend the Town of Volney zoning ordinance by adopting the proposed Town of Volney temporary moratorium on towers ordinance, and be it further resolved that the temporary moratorium on towers ordinance be filed in the minutes of the town clerk, be published once in the official newspaper of the Town of Volney, and be posted on the Town of Volney signboard in the Town of Volney Town Hall pursuant to New York State Town Law and the Town of Volney zoning ordinance. I will move it.
I'll second for discussion. What I would like to request from this board is, since we can't change it tonight without delaying things, and I think some of us at least would like to consider changing it, that we announce a public hearing at our next town board meeting in August to possibly address an amendment to it, And in the meantime, we could work on that amendment and carry this one out this evening and amend it next month so that we are sure that what we're doing is what we want to do.
I believe an amendment would require us going through the whole process again, would it not?
Yes, it would.
No, can Dennis speak to this?
In response to Mr. Rose, certainly, and Mr. McFarland, an amendment would require the process again. If it's within your rules of order to pass a resolution tonight, scheduling a public hearing for the August meeting, certainly could schedule such a public hearing. If the amendments were drafted prior to then, could potentially have those amendments adopted on that date. Of course, recognizing the publication requirements as went through on this, that has got to hit the paper with a 10 days notice surrounding towns and counties and everything as we did here. As long as that's all in by August, certainly it could be done.
There's enough time to do that, I believe.
I think so. We did it in the last one. Get with referrals out to the planners as well. Somebody's going to check the schedules to those other agencies. That could be done. As to my recommendation, essentially, as I see it, the board has two choices if it wants to change the language or consider changing it. One is change it now before adopting it. That can be done. Is there a risk? Yes. Dependent, how serious is the risk? That's going to depend on how significant the change is. Or, as Mr. Rose says, certainly could pass as is. It's something I mentioned earlier, and work on changes after tonight. That is the safer way to go in the sense that the ordinance is passed tonight, the moratorium ordinance, wouldn't be subject to challenge for failure if we say the other agencies having reviewed those changes. But certainly the board can go either way. The changes I've heard, I do have to admit, don't sound to me to be significant substantive changes. They're more procedural in nature. I would submit that the risk of a challenge based on the concerns I've raised, or losing in a challenge based on the concerns I've raised, that is failure of the planners to see those changes, probably is a small risk, but it's a risk nonetheless. The board is ultimately responsible for making that decision. I can't make that.
Gene, I'm going to do something that I really shouldn't be done, and that is engage in conversation with Gene Conway. Gene, would you be satisfied if town board were left there, or are you uncomfortable with that?
I think that would be fine, as long as, right, I think that would be fine.
I think some of the conversation that was held during the public hearing didn't match up to the reason why it was made the town board in the ordinance originally. It was not to redefine undue hardship. From the conversations we had, that was not a consideration at all. I assumed that we would follow the same guidelines for undue hardship as the ZBA. From the discussion, I thought that what the reason for making it with the town board was because of the interpretation of the definition. In case someone had some type of a personal use tower that was not meant to be restricted by a restriction on commercial use, that by the wording it was a question of interpretation. Was that meant to be part of this moratorium or not? Then we would know what our legislative intent in the definition was, where the ZBA wouldn't have known. Other than that, am I really interested in getting a new job to do? No.
Any other discussion?
Well, the only discussion is if we're right now leaving it to the town board, I would still like to see where it says or developer, because they have no hardships, like it was discussed, no hardships endured. We can accept it as now.
And then we can have a meeting about it and go through it again.
Go through it.
Yeah.
I think if it is left up to us, I think we, as a body, can very simply just throw it out, ignore them.
Well, I'd rather do it on the safe side. I mean, if
Okay.
I feel like if we accept it the way it is, which I got no problem with,
Then have a
work
meeting
on
on it and work on it.
what little wording we're talking about and re-present it in the public hearing.
Yeah, I'll support the idea of the second public hearing. Let's do it, let's get it out of the way, and that'll take care of the issue. We can have a public hearing. Everyone knows what we're going to do. The intent is to do two things, is to change two words, Town Board to Zoning Board of Appeals.
Not necessarily.
Well, I
Consider it.
Consider it, yes. To consider that, and the second part is certainly is to look at this word development. And I think those are the two issues we're going to address, and I see no reason for holding this up. I'm in favor of passing the thing. I think people have spoken. I've heard no one, with the exception of the letter, opposed to it. I have no problem with this. Let's do it, and let's get it out of the way.
Any other discussion? Florence, will you poll the council?
Councilman Ridgway.
Aye.
Councilman Rhodes.
Aye.
Councilwoman Smart.
Aye.
Councilman Warner.
Aye.
Supervisor McFarland.
While I continue to be concerned with the legal and financial implications this has, I'm going to make it unanimous and vote aye. Yes.
This, if anyone's interested in the fact that it's a final vote, it's not. It's application. Your town. Our town.
Okay. Thank you. We'll back up now to the agenda. Can we move the agenda? Tony, I promised Tony. Oh, okay, he's here.
I'd like to introduce him.
Yes, if you want to. Jim, we are again going out of sequence. Jim has a guest who has a presentation to make, and he does have other plans this evening, so Jim, why don't you carry on?
Yeah, I'd like to, at this time, to introduce Tony Kotz. Tony is with Kotz and Associates, who are park and recreation land development specialists. He has been working on a plan for the proposed town park, and he has some materials here that he'd like to share with you. Is that, can everyone see this? Will they be able to when it's uncovered? Okay. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Tony Kotz. Tony is our person who has been working with us on this.
Thank you. We've just begun working on the plans for the park. We had a meeting with the park committee about 2 weeks ago, and we had quite a large group of people who joined us at that meeting, primarily to discuss the facilities that people wanted in the park and the activities that they wanted to provide. What we have now is what we call a preliminary plan. It's a plan to show our interpretation of what we feel the people have said they want. It's not a final plan. There's still work to be done on it. But bear with me as I walk through it, and I'll try to cover the highlights of the plan. If you're all familiar, I believe, with the park site, this is County Route 6. This is a driveway that comes up through the park property into the fireman's property. Basically, this is a large open field. The creek runs down through here, and this is fairly low and wet and somewhat wooded and brush covered. First of all, the major activities that were wanted in the park is a large softball youth baseball field, which fits up here quite nicely, overlaid with a multi-purpose field which will serve for football, for soccer, lacrosse, all those kinds of sports that play on a football type of or soccer type of field. There's also an interest in being able to overlay 2 junior baseball, T-ball, shall we say, type fields for the little kids, which could play over the outfield of the baseball field. And we can get one here with home plate shooting out here, and one with home plate shooting out here. So basically, up in the high part of the field are what you call the athletic fields, if you want, the sports fields, which fit up here very nicely and lay in the land very nicely. The next group of activities that were requested were 2 volleyball courts. These are the 2 brown areas right down here. These would be sand volleyball courts. A basketball court, horseshoes, junior archery range for the young kids for basically teaching archery just to get started. This would have a berm behind it for stray arrows, that type of thing. Again, over here, out of the way of the rest of the park, and yet still within really what's all one big open field up here. Also, picnic areas with a large picnic pavilion that could be rented out, used for large groups, could be used for recreational programs, what have you. Horseshoes adjacent to that. At some point, the possibility of restrooms. These probably wouldn't happen immediately, or they could be temporary restrooms, porta-johns if need be, or at some point a permanent building. And if it were a permanent building, this is the ideal location to take the septic tank and the drainage for that. This is the high point of the property. A great deal of discussion centered around the children's play areas, the playground, play equipment. And the kids had a lot of great ideas, which we took down. They wanted a modular play structure, some of these modern play structures with a lot of activities that you see in some of the newer playgrounds. They wanted swings and tire swings, slides, cargo nets, parallel bars, a rubbery snake-type piece that is in one of the schools, places where they could just talk, sandboxes, bike racks, things like that. We have provided basically two areas. One area for the 5 to 12-year-old kids, which would have most of those in, and then separated an area for the under 5, which would have sandboxes, more passive, smaller, safer type equipment for the smaller kids. These are next to the picnic area, so that if you're having a picnic, you can watch your kids. They're away from the older kids. They're away from through traffic, what have you. They're in a safe place where they're visible, and yet you're separating the age groups. They can come up, use the picnic shelter, what have you also. So that seems to work out kind of nicely. We're providing parking for about 100 cars at this point. This is about as many as we can realistically fit in here without filling the whole park up with parking lot. For day-to-day use, for or even a busy weekend use, that should be okay. If you have a special event, that may be not quite okay, but you can't always provide for just those. We've provided the possibility of a jogging trail, which could also be conceivably a fitness trail, which was suggested. The fitness trail is basically a jogging trail, a walking trail, a running trail, which along it has certain pieces of equipment, almost like play equipment, but for adults as well as kids, where you do certain exercises at different places. And the thought is, as you complete the circuit, you do a variety of exercises that supposedly give you a well-rounded workout. There'll be things like chinning bars, places where you might do push-ups, chin-ups, sit-ups, that kind of thing. Maybe just a log that you do a push-up on, something of that nature. And they could be, at some point, placed along this. So you go from one to the other, and you stop, you do what it says to do, and you go on to the other. But until then, you can still just have a trail there. It's about a half-mile long for running, walking, what have you. So basically, we got the athletics over here. We have what I'd call the family activities over here. The picnic, the playgrounds, the horseshoes. And what I didn't mention was the open play area. So often in parks, we fill them all up with baseball fields and soccer fields. And even the kids, a couple weeks ago, were very adamant about the fact, let's not fill this up with just baseball fields and that kind of thing. Let's have space for all kinds of people to use it. We can go out, throw a frisbee, fly a kite, that type of thing. Have a little pickup game, go out here and play catch, something of that nature. So that gives you that opportunity to do that. Basically, it looks like a good use of the land. We're very happy with it. We're very comfortable ourselves with it. I think it works. I think it answers the questions that were raised, and it answers just about all the requests that were made of activities that were proposed. Our next step subject to the board and the park committee accepting this plan, will be to work on this in more detail, to work out the grading for these fields, work out how this may be phased, what pieces should come first, what the cost might be, what the opportunities might be for financing it, what some of the technical details are, so that you can get started and start building the park, hopefully.
Thanks, Tony.
Did you want to,
Can we see it, Tony?
Yeah, you should see it. Can I turn it around now?
My X-ray vision is failing me.
Also, Tony, I think there perhaps are going to be some questions out there. But,
Okay.
Thank you.
Also, Tony told us on Tuesday night that there's a possibility of some money loosening up for grants. And
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is anything changed again?
yeah.
Change the areas, put this down. It's basically.
One thing that Tony did point out to us Tuesday night is that there seems to be some monies becoming available for projects of this nature. And Tony certainly does work with and does write grants and does work in following through on securing grants for us. And he's for municipalities with whom he's working. And there's no guarantee, but those of you who've ever done grant work know that a professional that knows the ins and outs of grant writing has a much better opportunity and chance of getting a grant than a novice would do. So this is another phase that certainly might very well help us to finance this particular fund.
I might point out there's no guarantee of
Absolutely.
grants being available, but we'll keep our eyes open, and if there's some opportunity, we'll bring it to the board's attention.
Thank you very much, Tony, for that presentation. I'm going to allow a few minutes if anybody in the audience has any questions. I'm quite excited when I saw this plan, and I think you will be too. Do you have any questions for Tony? Go ahead, you can.
Denise Munger, I'm a member of the Recreation Committee. This looks familiar, considering it's got quite a bit of what Howard Rose had on his plan. And I want to know, what are the chances of getting a grant? What's our chances? What's our chances right now of getting a grant for this?
I can't give you an odds at this point. I don't think anybody can.
Okay, how much is it going to cost taxpayers?
Nobody knows that yet. That'll be the next
Okay,
step
so
to figure out how
there's-
this can be implemented, how much can be done by volunteers and/or town forces and/or other means, what needs to be perhaps purchased or contracted. And we will do cost estimates. That'll be the next step after this. Do some cost estimates, so we'll have a handle on it. Both to know what the hard costs will be, but also to know what would be eligible for particular grants as they become available. So nobody could answer that tonight.
I know we've had quite a bit of things donated to us. Are we going to be allowed to use this?
I would certainly expect so, yes. In fact, with grants, typically, with state grants, the donated labor or donated materials are a valid match to the state match. Many of these grants are like 50% grants. They match your investment. So if you invest $50,000, the state will give you $50,000. But your $50,000 could be volunteer help, labor. It could be bricks and block donated by somebody. It could be the highway department paving the parking lot or grading the parking lot, something of that nature. That would all be part of the town's share
Right.
So that theoretically, you might do it without any quote-unquote town expenditure.
Okay, when you mean volunteers, what do you mean by volunteers?
It could be you and me, it could be a contractor coming in and saying he will grade the field. It could be somebody donating the sand for the baseball infield, let's say, or maybe a service club donating the picnic shelter, or a piece of play equipment. These are all kind of picnic tables, all those kinds of things.
Well, I was just wondering, because I think we were told before that we couldn't go in and do anything. And, you know, it had to be done by a professional.
No, that's, most of the, I don't know of any grant program that says that. There may be some, but the ones that are the most typical, what's happening, and I think what Mr. Ridgway was talking about, is the state is going to have another round of grants under what's a federal program, actually the Land and Water Conservation Fund. It's administered through the state of New York. And they have some money left over from previous years, mainly money that was granted to other towns that maybe did not get spent, or when they got around to it, they couldn't match, they couldn't use the grant, so they're back to the state, and they're now going to make this money available again. And we've been encouraged to be prepared in the next few months to perhaps make applications for this, that once they come out, they haven't even announced the date yet, they haven't announced all the rules yet, but we're pretty sure how it's going to be, because it's typically the same pretty much. And in this grant program, they encourage this type of thing. They don't discourage it, they encourage volunteers, donated materials and labor, and that type of thing. Yes, ma'am.
Christine Rose, what do you charge to apply for a grant?
That's going to depend on how much work the town can do, how much we need to do to work with the town. What we will do is work out a fee based on the particular grant program, based on the degree of how much we have to do on it. All we do is charge for our time.
The more you would request, probably the more expensive it would cost.
Not necessarily, no.
Well, could you give us the ballpark of what you charge to apply for a grant?
Well, first of all,
say, for instance, we've been told this could run up to possibly $200,000. If that was the case, what would it cost to apply?
well, let me say, first of all, no cost estimate whatsoever has been made on the cost of
I
the
didn't say
open
it was
park.
definite, I just said it was a ballpark amount.
Yeah, that number, I remember, Kate, was brought up in the last meeting I attended, and somebody even attributed it to me. And the fact is, I have not done a cost estimate yet. I have absolutely no idea what this is going to cost. I also have no idea how much of this can be volunteered or donated, which will affect the cost. That's the next step.
What is your charge for the next step, for you to prepare for the next step?
The next step is still part of what we're under contract with the town to do now, and that is to carry this to more detail so that we can come up with some cost estimates. Know what we have to do generally as far as draining the fields, whatever needs to be done to make this a workable plan. That is what I say is our next task to do in the next few weeks, working with the park committee. That's all part of what we're obligated to do. At that point, when and if a grant program comes along, we will sit down and work out, because what happens with a grant program, we can do the whole application. It's going to, first of all, depend on what the program is to the degree of how complicated the applications are. Some are simpler than others. It also depends on what we feel your chances of getting a grant are. And what we will do before we spend any of your money is talk with the grant people, find out what they feel your odds may be, so you're not going out and spending a lot of money on us if the odds are very low of getting any money. I'm not here to take your money, I'm here to help you.
So they are quite expensive and prepare.
No, typically something like it's going to be probably $1,000 or less, because you do have to do an environmental review, a seeker determination, and some of those things, which you're going to have to do anyway, quite frankly. Just as you just had to do a seeker determination resolution you just passed. But there is here, you've got environmental impacts that have to be assessed, have to be identified.
Have we already done one? Because I know there has been some work done over there, the road, the fence. Has a secret process already been done on that?
Nothing has been done other than putting the road in and the fence, basically.
I would suspect if you did have one for what you did, if it was the road and the fence, what we're proposing here would require a new one. Now, what you will probably do is an environmental assessment. You would probably come up with a negative declaration, typically on something of this nature. So you will not get involved with a draft environmental impact statement and all that business, typically. So it's not a big deal, it's just something you have to do. Yes, sir?
You mentioned when you were describing that it would be phased. Now, does that mean phased in terms of just sequencing what's built first, or phased over a period of time? They could put in one part and then at some other point complete another section.
Well, I would think, pardon me, I'm not trying to be too facetious, but somebody wanted to donate everything in this park, the town would probably be very happy to accept it, and you'd have one phase. I suspect, more realistically, there are hard costs to this, even if you did get somebody to donate, or someone's to donate a lot of the development of this park, grading and roads and that kind of thing. You're into buying playground equipment, picnic shelters, things like that, that you're going to have to, the committee needs to decide what, first of all, needs to be done first to make the park usable. You can't build a picnic shelter without grading the picnic area and growing grass and things like that. There's some things that are very obvious from a practical, physical standpoint. You don't build a house, you don't build the roof before you build the foundation type thing. So some obvious sequencing in that respect. Same thing applies here. Secondly, then, once you've done those basics, what are the priorities as far as the needs of the people of the town? Do you want the ball fields before you want the children's play area? And even within the play area, you can phase that and put in some of the equipment, leave the space, and each year come in with some more, or come in 2 years later and add some, what have you. That's the type of thing we're talking about.
So that is feasible, depending on what happens, it's feasible.
I would expect that's how it would happen. That's sure. That's how we'll design it. And what we will do, the committee is determine what the feelings are. Maybe pressing need, you gotta have this ball field right away. We talked to the young folk who were here a couple of weeks ago, the play area and some of this is really, they're really interested in that. We'd like to see that happen so, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
You could leave that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
First, I'm a little confused about the process here. The original $4,500 fee to draw up, get this far, it was my understanding it was mostly just to come up with the best use of the land. Are you now saying that that's going to include maybe some detailed plans, maybe some drainage and things, or? Because I thought that was the second part of the $4,500.
No. The first part that you've hired us to do will take this to one step more detail. It will show yes or no, we need drainage in, let's say, just for example, I'm not suggesting this, in the ball fields. If it does, it will have a generic idea of what it will cost and what type of drainage we will put in, so that you can have a hard, firm budget estimate for each of the items of construction. And you will need that if you go for a grant application, and you'll need it for your own capital budgeting, and you'll need it to go out and maybe somebody in the town wants to donate the under drainage in the ball field if we need it. We will go to that extent. The next step after that would be after you get your grant, if you go for a grant, or at what time you are ready to start construction. And particularly if you contract it out to a contractor, you will need more detailed plans and specifications for construction, detailed grading plan, specifications on the type of grass seed to plant for athletic fields, specifications on the pieces of play equipment, what they are, what they have to be. You need to do that. First of all, if you bid it, you need it by state law. That's what I call the second phase. But we will give you, we're only halfway through the part you've hired us for.
The $200,000 that was mentioned at the last meeting I brought up, and it was a question I posed to you about my plans, what you thought it might cost, and you did relay that to all of us at $200,000 was your rough guess of what that might cost. That's where that figure came from.
That's probably, quite frankly, if this were to be contracted out to a contractor at this point, you're probably a park of this size without terribly unusual conditions with this amount of things in it, quote unquote, would probably cost upwards $200,000 plus or minus 30%, something like that. But Volney is not any other town. This piece of land is not any other piece of land. You have soil conditions and drainage conditions here, which are different than other sites. However, your grades are easier here, so some things are going to cost more, some things are going to cost less. So, check.
Basically, that is still saying it would be around 200,000 perhaps if the entire thing were to be done by a contractor who was hired by us, not if we use our town highway department and donated materials.
Absolutely. And let's not, I really would rather not even use that $200,000 number. Let us come up with a real number based on what we agreed to go into the park. And that was given before we even drew anything. And that is terribly valuable. I can spend twice as much or half as much just in the play equipment alone, for example, than what that might represent. And you can do that with everything. You can gold plate it, gravel parking lot, or you can come in and put curbs and paving and all that, I mean, the total extreme there. Yes, ma'am.
Question, now you keep saying the highway department's gonna build this park as volunteers possibly. Well, you said that you would use them as volunteers.
I said, for example, you could.
Okay, well, my question is, are we gonna volunteer their time during the town time or on a Saturday and Sunday and say, you're volunteering your time? And how do you plan to use the highway department to?
I agree, that's up to Mr. Cummings.
No,
It's not his, he can't answer that. He can't answer that.
Oh, no, the point I was trying to make was, the question was asked about, with grants and that sort of thing, whether donations and that kind of thing would detract. And I said, typically, and I meant this typically in any town, I wasn't referring to your town. You could have volunteers come in, a contractor come in and volunteer his equipment to grade the ball fields. You could have a service club, for example, come in as often and build, as they often do, and build a picnic shelter.
I understand that.
And you could also have the highway department come in and, let's say, build the parking lot or build the tennis court, the basketball court, or something of that nature. I was not suggesting they would, could, or should, and I don't know what your position is. That's what we have to do next.
Well, my concern is, are we going to be using their time when they're on town time, or are we going to expect these people to come in on Saturday and Sunday? And I think that has to be a concern of the highway. I would be very concerned if I was an employee of the highway department.
Well, so would I. Typically, in the context that I said it, often towns, they will use their highway department during paid time. If they're building this road rather than out repairing a highway someplace else in the town, if it works into their schedule, if they have capacity to do so. And I don't know that. Pardon me?
Is that how it's working on the town?
Yes. So I was just saying that's one possibility. I have not discussed it with the board. We've not even.
No, I've heard the board also mention it.
Yeah. But it is a possibility. And that, what I was saying was, that if they do that, if they build this road and this parking lot, and let's say that's worth $50,000, you can use that $50,000 value as the town share to maybe get $50,000, say from the state, to do something else that you would have to pay for. That's one more question.
Randy's had his hand.
Oh, I'm sorry, Randy, I could see it back there.
I'd just like to thank Tony personally. The first meeting we had, he got cornered by a lot of children from the neighborhood and from Volney. He was very gracious. He took time and he took them into consideration what they had to say and put it into the park. And I just want to thank you personally, as far as Recreation Director and President of Parks and Recreation. I'm glad you did that. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tony. We appreciate it. We'll be in touch.
Okay. I'll leave this for the board.
Okay, thank you.
This meeting is becoming a tad disjointed. We are on communications. And I've got several communications. The first one, under communications, is a letter from David O'Brien. Dear Town Board, as of August 1, 1993, I am officially resigning from the Assistant Building Inspector position. In early May this year, I accepted a new position with a firm in Manlius. It was an offer that was difficult to refuse. However, with this new job, they asked me to relocate. I am presently living in Manlius, and the last couple of months finding it very difficult to perform my duties in Volney. With all fairness to the town, as much as I love the job, I now cannot dedicate the time the job requires. I would like to thank Mr. McFarland and the town board for their trust in me and the chance to serve the town of Volney. For the record, I would like to say I very much enjoyed working with Ed Kuhn, the present building inspector, and felt we had an excellent working relationship, which I will miss. He is a very dedicated individual performing a full-time job on a part-time salary. And that is the reason for resolution number 93-109, which involves placing an ad for a new deputy building inspector. The next letter is from Linda Howard. Dear Mr. McFarland, I am leaving New York State and will not be able to continue in my position as assessor for the town of Volney. Thank you for the opportunity to serve the town of Volney. Signed, Linda Howard, assessor, and that is the reason for resolution 93-110, which requires an advertisement for a replacement for her. The next is a lawsuit that has been brought by the legal firm of Helm, Shapiro, Anito, and McHale, and it is a lawsuit that is being brought against perhaps every municipality in which Niagara Mohawk has facilities. And it is a lawsuit against the State Board of Equalization and Assessment. As you can imagine, they are appealing their assessments in every community in which they are located. The next is a check from the Insurance Department of New York State to the treasurer of the Fire Department of the Volney Fire Protection District in the amount of $4,358.20. I am supposed to acknowledge this publicly that we have received it. It has been passed on to the Volney Fire Department.
What that is anytime anyone gets a fire policy, there is a small fee that you pay on there that goes to the local fire department, and it's the insurance companies giving that money to the state so it can be distributed to the correct town.
The next communication is, these are getting to be monthly letters from Rodney Moss, who is system manager of New Channels cable television. And he writes, the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, has delayed its effective date of rate regulation for the cable industry until October 1, 1993. The 1992 Cable Act had initially identified June 21 as the date cable companies had to restructure rates in compliance with the new federal guidelines. As part of its June 11 announcement, the FCC extended a revenue freeze for cable companies until November 15. Though cable rates will change between now and then in compliance with the new guidelines, the average monthly bill paid by subscribers within a cable system must not increase. I have a letter from the town of Chester, signed by Margaret Rumbach, who is the supervisor of the town of Chester, and the last resolution, 93-112, is what she has requested us to pass. Her letter reads, Katie Bonelli, the supervisor of Blooming Grove, and myself need your understanding so you will unite with us to alleviate the fear, stress, and tension that New York City has imposed on our small towns by sending into our communities men with outstanding criminal warrants, thus helping felons escape from the criminal justice system. Our towns are small and rural, and our citizens deserve their basic constitutional rights. We have for 80 years been good neighbors and helping hands to Camp LaGuardia, a New York City homeless shelter for 1,000 men. For the past 2 years, under the new rules, our community has seen increases in drugs, criminal acts, verbal and physical abuse, and health threats. I appeal to you to stand with us as we fight for the rights of our people. Enclosed is a resolution that you may pass to support us in having all of the men sent here checked for outstanding warrants. And the last one I kind of enjoy receiving. Last month, I informed everybody that the IRS had written us and said that we had underpaid the federal employment tax for the first quarter of this year by 3 cents. And I read you the letter I wrote to them and asked that they would reconsider the penalty of $169.44 for our failure to pay that 3 cents when due. And I have a communique from them, and there's no explanation, but they now say that we have an overpayment of 1 cent. So I guess it means they forgive us the penalty.
But you have the check.
It's not a check. Not a check, but the IRS will not make refunds of anything less than $1, so I'm not looking for a check for a penny. That concludes communications. Committee reports. Assessors.
Basically, the assessors have been busy this month with finalizing things to the county that they had to have by July 1st for the tax rolls that will be used for the school taxes this fall and the town and county taxes in January of next year. And then all of the communique you read about Niagara Mohawk and the problems with equalization and assessment. Both Janet LaSalle from the state and our assessors have been involved in meetings to determine what is the best course for local towns to take as relates to Niagara Mohawk while this whole issue is still up in the air.
Thank you, Claudia.
Excuse me, Mr. Brown, could I ask Claudia one question? Are we making any progress on our meeting with Janet LaSalle and Bernie Wolf?
Well, we were until all this got going with Niagara Mohawk. Hopefully things will calm down by next month so that we can.
Thank you.
Planning Board, Kevin Conley had to leave. I believe Jess has his report.
Yes, he left me a copy of his report, Dave. He said the planning board held its last meeting on Tuesday, July 6th. At that meeting, the planning board did the following. 1, approved the standard subdivision, a 12-unit subdivision located on Hawk Road and Raleigh Roads. 2, reached the public hearing stage on the Cellular One microwave tower located on Pierce Drive.
And excuse me for interrupting, Jess. I did talk to Kevin as he was leaving. He said if the moratorium was passed, that would be canceled.
He didn't say anything when he had it for this.
Okay, no, he didn't, but excuse me for
Well,
interrupting.
in other words, it says the public hearing is scheduled for July 20th, but will be canceled at the event of the passage of the moratorium. It says our next regular meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, July 20th. We will be working with the Whitewaters people as they continue to develop the River Glen Plaza. We encourage anyone with business to come to the July 20th meeting as we intend to minimize August meetings. Kevin Conley, Chairman, Planning Board. And I'll give this.
Thank you, Jess. Zoning Board. Barbara? You can have the report.
Their meeting won't be until next week, so they haven't had a meeting in between.
Code Enforcement Officer. Ed, do you have a report?
Yes.
Business was up in June. We issued 3 permits for barns, 4 for additions, 1 aircraft hangar, 3 pools, 2 decks, 1 repair project, 4 homes, 4 garages, and 1 septic system. Total of the 23 permits had fees of $2,550.
Thank you, Ed.
Mr. Volney, could I ask Mr. Kewen about the discussion we had earlier?
Certainly.
Mr. Kewen, when you inspect above-ground pools, what is your typical amount of trips you make to do that? When you inspect above-ground pools, how many trips do you normally make to do that?
That depends on whether or not they're in proper shape the first, second, third, or fourth time. Normally, they are in good shape the first time because there isn't a fence problem with them.
Okay, but when they're being constructed, don't you usually have stages where you say, I'll be back when you get to this
No,
stage?
sir.
You don't?
Not.
You just keep making trips and, why do you just keep making trips? I don't understand that. Why can't we just make a couple trips?
Because I am going by, I stop to see if they are done. I cannot control the speed at which the owner puts up his pool.
I understand that.
Oh, good.
We can't hear you.
But yes, could you face them when you talk as well? What I'm asking, though, some pools you only go to 1 or 2 times, other pools you go to 9 times. It just doesn't make sense to me until...
Well, I thought I just explained it. It depends on how fast it is completed.
Well, can't
If
you...
it is put in promptly, few trips.
Can't you
If
simply...
it isn't, no.
Can't you simply make a phone call to find out instead of totaling up all the mileage?
I
That's what
can't
I'm asking.
very well see it over the phone.
You can ask what stage they're at.
Not if there's no answer. And most places, the people are out during the day, which is why I go out on weekends.
Okay, it just makes me wonder why you make 9 trips to a swimming pool that's above ground when right next door there's a garage going up with no building permit. I guess that was my suspicion on why you would do that.
Which garage is going up with no permit?
I informed you of that about 2 weeks ago.
The garage has a permit, it's had a permit for...
When I asked you, you told me there was no permit. You didn't even know of it.
So I went down, saw the man, gave him an application, he completed it, and I gave him a permit.
Okay, after I informed you of it.
That's right. I did not travel up into his backyard, which is about, well, you are very familiar with it. How far back is his yard from Route 57?
Well, it's only about 100 feet from the pool you've been inspecting. That's why I was wondering.
No, it's not 100 feet from the pool I've been inspecting, because I can't see through the backyard.
Thank you.
There are many buildings that start up without a building permit. And until it's called to the building inspector's attention by somebody, then he will go out and ensure that is taken care of.